World War I, causes, course, and consequences expanded. Year-by-year analysis, World War I, often referred to as the Great War, was a global conflict that unfolded between 1914 and 1918 and fundamentally transformed international politics, warfare, and society. This expanded analysis presents a detailed, year-by-year account of the war, while also examining its deep-rooted causes and far-reaching consequences. The aim is to provide a comprehensive and structured understanding of how the war began, how it developed over time, and how it reshaped the modern WORLDI, long-term and immediate. Causes of World War I. The origins of World War I lay in a complex combination of political, economic, military, and ideological factors that developed over several decades. Militarism. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, European powers increasingly believed that military strength was essential to national survival. Governments invested heavily in armies, navies, and new weapons technologies. Military leaders gained significant influence over political decision-making, and war plans were drawn up long before 1914. This environment normalized the idea of war as an acceptable tool of policy. Alliance system. Europe became divided into two rigid alliance systems. The Triple Entente, composed of Britain, France, and Russia, faced the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These alliances were defensive in theory but aggressive in practice. Once war broke out, they ensured that a regional crisis would escalate into a general war. Imperialism and economic rivalry. Industrialization intensified competition for raw materials. Dominance. While French and Russian ambitions clashed with Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman interests. Imperial rivalry in established nation-states but destabilized multi-ethnic empires. In the Balkans, nationalist movements sought independence from Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian rule. Serbia emerged as a focal point of Slavic nationalism supported by Russia, which viewed itself as the protector of Slavic peoples. The July Crisis of 1914. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on the 28th of June 1914 triggered the July Crisis. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, backed by Germany. When Serbia rejected some of its demands, Austria-Hungary declared war. Diplomatic efforts failed, and within weeks, Europe was at war. 2. The course of World War I, year by year, political, military, and social analysis. 1914. The outbreak of war. Political situation. 1914. In 1914, Europe experienced a rapid collapse of diplomatic norms, demonstrated how mistrust and miscalculation dominated international relations. Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia triggered alliance obligations, drawing Germany, Russia, France, and Britain into the conflict within weeks. Domestically, governments used nationalism and propaganda to justify mobilizability. Germany implemented the Schlieffen Plan, advancing through Belgium toward Paris. This strategy failed after the First Battle of the Marne, forcing German troops to retreat and dig trenches. On the Eastern Front, Germany achieved a decisive victory over Russia at Tannenberg, while Austria-Hungary suffered defeats against Russian forces. By the end of the year, trench systems stretched across Western Europe, signaling a long war. Social conditions. 1914. Socially, many civilians initially. However, by late 1914, the reality of mass casualties, missing soldiers, and wounded veterans began to erode morale. Families experienced anxiety and grief as casualty lists grew. 1915. Stalemate and expansion. Political situation. 1915. Politically, 1915 saw the war expand as new states joined. Italy entered the war on the Allied side after secret negotiations promised territorial rewards. Governments increasingly centralized power, restricting civil liberties and directing economies toward total war. Diplomatic efforts focused on weakening enemy alliances rather than seeking peace. Military developments. 1915. On the battlefield, stalemate dominated the Western Front. Both sides launched offensively, marking a new phase of industrialized killing. In the east, German and Austro-Hungarian forces pushed Russian armies backward. The Gallipoli campaign against the Ottoman Empire ended in Allied failure, strengthening Ottoman resistance. Social conditions. 1915. Civilian life, transport, and administrative roles in unprecedented numbers. The social structure began to change as traditional gender roles were challenged by wartime. Necessity. 1916, the War of Attrition. Political situation. 1916. By 1916, government massive casualties. Technological warfare reached new extremes with heavy artillery, machine guns, and early tanks. At sea, the Battle of Jutland confirmed British naval dominance without decisive victory. Social conditions. 1916. The prolonged war caused deep psychological strain. Soldiers suffered from shell shock while civilians endured rationing and constant loss. Public confidence in military leadership declined as victory seemed increasingly distant. 1917. A turning point. Political situation. 1917. Politically, 1917 was transformative. In Russia, revolution overthrew the Tsar and later brought the Bolsheviks to power, altering the balance of power. Military developments. 1917. Military morale deteriorated across all fronts. Mutinies occurred in the French army and German submarine warfare intensified in the Atlantic. Although American troops arrived in Europe, their main impact would come later. Fighting continued, but strategic momentum slowed. Social conditions. 1917. Social unrest increased sharply. Food shortages, inflation, and war fatigue led to strikes and protests. Civilian populations questioned the purpose of continued sacrifice. Weakening national unity. 1918. Collapse and armistice. Political situation. 1918 and 1918. Political systems within the Central Powers collapsed. Revolutions erupted in Austria-Hungary and Germany, leading to the abdication of monarchs and the establishment of republics. New governments sought peace to prevent further internal chaos. Military developments. 1918. Germany launched the Spring Offensive in a final attempt to win the war before American forces fully arrived. Initial successes could not be sustained. Allied counteroffensives, supported by fresh American troops, forced German retreat. On the 11th of November 1918, an armistice ended the fighting. Social conditions. 1918. As the war ended, societies faced immense challenges. Millions mourned the dead, economies were shattered, and returning soldiers struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Relief at the war's end was tempered by grief and uncertainty about the future. 3. Major battles of World War I. Detailed analysis. The Battle of Verdun. 1916. Verdun was one of the longest and most destructive battles in history. Germany aimed to bleed France dry by forcing it to defend a strategically important position. Over 10 months, both sides suffered enormous casualties. Verdun became a symbol of French resistance and the senseless brutality of attritional warfare. The Battle of the Somme. 1916. The Somme was launched by British and French forces to relieve pressure on Verdun. The first day was the deadliest in British military history. Despite months of fighting and over 1 million casualties, territorial gains were minimal. The battle demonstrated the devastating power of machine guns and artillery. The Gallipoli Campaign. 1915-1916. The Gallipoli Campaign aimed to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war and secure control of the Dardanelles. Poor planning, strong Ottoman resistance, and harsh terrain led to Allied failure. The campaign had lasting political and cultural significance, particularly for Turkey, Australia, and New Zealand. Other significant battles. Other important engagements included Tannenberg, Passchendaele, and the Brusilov Offensive. Each highlighted different aspects of the war, from mobility on the Eastern Front to the horrors of mud-filled trench battles in the West. Consequences of World War I. Human and economic devastation. World War I resulted in approximately 16 million deaths and left millions more wounded or traumatized. Entire regions were destroyed, and economies were severely weakened. The psychological impact of the war reshaped literature, art, and philosophy. Political restructuring. The collapse of major empires led to the creation of new states in Europe and the Middle East. However, many borders were drawn without regard for ethnic realities, creating long-term instability. The Treaty of Versailles and other peace settlements. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and reparations. Similar treaties reshaped Austria, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. These agreements failed to establish lasting peace, social change, and legacy. The war accelerated social change, particularly for women, who entered industrial and professional roles in large numbers. At the same time, the disillusionment caused by the war weakened faith in traditional institutions and contributed to political radicalization. Long-term impact: World War I fundamentally altered international relations and set the stage for World War II. The unresolved tensions and grievances of the post-war settlement ensured that the legacy of the Great War would continue to shape global politics for decades. Conclusion: World War I was a defining event of the 20th century. Examined year by year, it reveals how a combination of ambition, fear, and miscalculation can lead to prolonged catastrophe. Its lessons remain relevant today, reminding humanity of the immense cost of war and the importance of diplomacy and cooperation.